What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. In the top baits of the month of July, dog days of summer is officially hit. Just came back to the Potomac River and whew, it was a hot one. Over 100 degrees for 2 days in practice. Some of the hottest days of fishing, especially the amount of time we fished on those days, because daylight to dark was, I mean, a lot of time out there on the water, 13, 14 plus hours on that water. So we're gonna talk a little bit about what this heat does to a lot of our fisheries, some of the techniques that I think are gonna play for the month of July, and sort of how my mind sort of goes about breaking down a body of water and getting ready for some good fishing. This is still a great time of year to catch some really big fish. They definitely are gonna adjust, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that. But for the viewers out there, make sure to drop a comment below and sort of give me a heads up on like a recommendation of a lake you wanna see broken down, because we're taking a comment from the last video. Falls Lake in North Carolina is what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be utilizing a lot of these techniques. I'll also sort of throw in there for some of my northern folks some ideas, but a lot of this is Midwest bass fishing all the way down to the south. A lot of the same patterns and techniques are going to play throughout the country, from Texas all over the country. As long as these places set up any way similar, a lot of these same techniques will work on your body's water. So that being said, hot summer days, number one recommendation is going to be to get out there early or fish later in the evening. Still, there's bite windows later in the evenings, in the afternoon bite, especially offshore. There's something about those fish when they decide to group up. They group up in the last few hours of daylight, and that can still be your best times to go out there and catch those fish in the evening offshore. So that being said, we're going to jump into a little bit of it. First thing I'm really going to talk about is how the fish, let's just sort of jump to the map and give you guys an understanding of what went down in June. So that way we can get a better understanding of what I'm really going to see in July. June, we had a lot of rain. We had a lot of flow for the majority of the country, or we had some higher waters still out there in Oklahoma. You start to see some of that stuff. Now we're getting back to normal, less rain, but we're having those summertime showers, right? So looking at Falls Lake right here, it's sort of a river run lake, has, you know, lots of pockets. The main part of this lake on this lower half is going to be narrow. And then you go further up the lake and you have more flats and open water, and becomes more, you can go back up into flatter areas and tributaries in the river itself. So that sort of gives, you have steep stuff and then you have flatter areas. So you can sort of talk a little bit about that. What happened in June is typically May and June, you have fish that pull out offshore and they get on like main lake ledges or points that they're going to be utilizing current or those places to ultimately give them the best chance to feed. So you have all these fish a lot of times coming out of a pocket, say like this, they spawn in this flat spawning area, flat creek. They come out here to this main river ledge right here, and they set up along that ledge on some specific spot the current hit, or the fish feel like there's a good abundance amount of bait where they can sit on a hard spot, and they're going to sit there for a lot of times in June. Those fish are still, some of those fish will still be there in July, but those fish tend to start to break up and they start to go back shallow. So when I mean breaking up and going back shallow, say you have 100 bass and they start to now break up. Now there's 50 bass there, and some of the fish start going up here on the bank. Some of these fish start going in the backs of these creeks looking for bluegill that are still spawning. Some of the fish slide all the way, maybe in the back of the creek, into the headwater, what I call the headwater, where there's a little bit still flow and more oxygen. So you have these fish that start to transition back shallow. I'm not saying there's always fish that live shallow, but the main population starts to transition back shallow in the month of July. And that's why, you know, I wanted to sort of preface this month for you guys to have an understanding of what was going to go down. First bait that I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite ways to target fish in the dog days of summer is flipping lay down wood and flipping docks. Because those fish are looking for that shallower cover. Typically that's where a lot of the bluegill and the bait fish are around. And one of my favorite baits to flip is that hedgehog. Something slim profile this time of year really tends to play a big role in generating bites for me. Reason why that is, I like to slim down a little bit, but I also, you can see I'm throwing a 3/8 ounce flipping weight. That heavier, faster fall, even going up to a half sometimes, that right there to me makes a big difference in generating the bite. A lot of times the fish don't want to really feed this time of year. Making them react on the initial drop is a very important part of generating the bite. So that's why I'm always a really big, fan of starting to go up in size this time of year, specifically when I'm pitching around shallow cover and trying to make those fish react. You need a little bit of stained water. I'm not gonna recommend doing this on super clear bodies of water on the main lake. If you can go in the backs of the creeks, you're looking for a little bit of dinge, a little bit of stain where you can get closer on those fish and you can generate those bites flipping this bait. Or up the rivers is a great scenario. So what I'll show you right here, say it's up the rivers and falls. So you go past all this stuff, you have this main river channel, and boom, now you're up into the river section of Falls Lake. Flipping these laydowns and stuff like that's a great scenario where I'm going to be picking up this rod and picking up this technique, picking up that hedgehog and flipping a lot of that cover that's initially in front of me. Those fish are susceptible to getting by. I mean, this is some of the best flipping time of year that I personally have seen. It even works from Rayburn and several places in the country. It seems to, in the bushes that still have water in them, this is a great way to generate a lot of bites because those fish out offshore have probably gotten a lot of pressure at this point in time. So this becomes one of the better patterns to generating some of the bigger bites if you're just fun fishing or if you're in a tournament. So that's something that I definitely would recommend. 7.3 heavy is what I personally like for just pitching around. That's that 2.0 series. 17-pound line is just an all-around good flipping and pitching around line. And 7.3 to 1, 8.3 to 1 higher gear ratio reels, just because if they bite it, I want to the hook and get that fish. A lot of times in shallow water, these fish are in 1 foot to 2 feet of water. A lot of times, and sometimes they'll get on the edge of a lay down and stuff, but you're just trying to figure out where the bite is going to be had, and then you go from there. You know what I'm saying? That's sort of where my mind's at there, because that's something that you can put in your hand, you can pitch around and you can generate bites. And that's what I love about, that bait specifically. It's a little bit smaller profile, but it's something that I can generate bites in doing so. So recommendations on areas, again, steeper, some of these steeper banks, even in some of these creeks where you have some of the last little bit of water, a shallow little lay down. Some of these bluegill will still be up there, even if they're not spawning, the bluegill will be present in the areas. And the other reason why I'm big on a heavier weight, because you have to cover a lot of water a lot of times to put your bait in front of a couple bass. It's not like it was, they're not as congregated, I guess, in July. Maybe in a river section, they might be on an outside bend or something like that. Along those steeper banks, you're gonna have, they might be on the flat and there might be a couple laydowns and you flip those laydowns and you get a couple bites, but you're gonna have to really be able to be efficient, and hopefully most of your bites are coming on the fall and you don't have to let it sit there and soak and take your time. I'm not big on taking my time this time of year in general. I don't like it anyway. Really being able to have a heavier weight allows for you to make more pitches throughout the day, and then ultimately, hopefully, putting your bait in front of more fish and getting those bites from those active fish and those ones that were in your app. So that's definitely a technique that I highly recommend for if you're trying to get shallow and just turn the electronics off and go bass fishing. Next on my list is going to be something sort of along the same along the lines of the river fishing aspect of that, even if you're in Table Rock. I mean, literally all over the country, rivers will start to play. The oxygen levels are higher than a lot of times the main lake, and those fish will start to get, this is a great time of year to get ahead because everybody starts to transition to this deal in August, but July is probably the month that it really starts to kick off. And so you can get on those populations of bass that haven't been messed with because those groups of fish weren't the best. I mean, they haven't even been, a lot of them just made their way out of the backwaters in some of these rivers, say on the Tennessee River, up the lake, or they haven't even been to the main river yet. So they start to try, some of them actually start to migrate and push into certain areas to get to where they want to be at. And that's when like the river fishing's so good. So if flipping and pitching is not the best case scenario, a lot of times what happens is the fish will get on flatter cover at times as well, like laydowns in the backs of like major creek arms, like flat areas. That'll be a major player. What will happen is you have this year's shad spawn typically happening in May, and your smaller bait fish or literally this year's hatch of shad start to get big enough where the bass can target them. So you'll have this abundance of shad around, you'll see it in around these areas. And that's when I go back to a flat side. The water's dirtier. This is a OG tiny. And so this one runs about 3 or 4 feet, and so to me, this is a great little bait from here on out when I'm trying to mimic a smaller profile bait fish that some of these fish are targeting, right? And if they're just a little bit weird about, some of that stuff, like to me, that bait goes through the cover really, really well. And it's also something that like I'm trying to get a reaction strike from those fish, right? On a key piece of cover, say it's a big laydown on a flat, there might be 3 or 4 bass sitting on that piece of cover. I might catch one flipping, but I pick that crankbait up and I'm banging around some of that piece of cover, stop it, banging around, snap it around, locks up. catch that fish that's sort of off the cover a little bit more. You know, I'm catching the easy one that was up there with a flipping stick, and maybe I'm picking that crankbait up, or if I'm fishing a team tournament, I have the guy in the back of the boat flipping and the guy in the front of the boat cranking, and just really trying to pick that cover apart, right? Flat side, don't underestimate it. It's definitely something that's more stained water technique, so if you're not in the stained water aspect, I can understand that, but these are sort of ways if you want to get some bites in the dog days of summer. I feel like there's ways to generate those bites, and getting back in those flatter areas, those creeks, those flats start to be a major player where those fish are going to set up. Now to some of my grass fishermen and fishermen all over the country, just coming from the Potomac, you cannot go wrong with a chatterbait still this month of July. A lot of times there's still bluegill spawning, the bluegill are in the grass, the perch are in the grass. A chatterbait is a great way to generating some bites. If I'm in 2 feet of water or less, I'm gonna go with a 3/8 ounce jackhammer typically. If I'm deeper, I'm going to throw a half. This is a black blue-green pump, but to me, you know, that's just a great way to generate bites and cover water if I feel like the fish are really trying to key in on that bluegill, you know, sort of deal. The water's a little bit more stained. If I can't generate the bite on a chatterbait, a lot of times that's when I transition to a Swimjig. But the chatterbait trailer of choice, Freeloader, black blue-green pump right there, or typically I'm gonna go with the bluegill patterns this time of year. So black and blue, green pumpkin, or if the water's stained, or just green pumpkin with maybe like a sungill trailer. It just really depends on your personal preference. But that's sort of like a deal that I can cast that around in some of the grass areas, say Gunnersville, Rayburn. Now obviously Falls doesn't have a lot of that, from my understanding, a lot of grass. So it's gonna be a little bit different scenario, but I wanted to sort of touch on this. Also for some of my friends that if the water's a little bit too clean for that chatterbait, and the fish have seen that all year long, because the chatterbait's a very popular way to generate some bites. A Swimjig is another great way to get some bites. Throwing like a 3/8 ounce Swimjig with, you know, this is actually Welcher Swimjig right here. That's just a great way, clean up crawl on the back, swimming it around, casting it out there on that grass. It can be a way to generate some bites. Those fish, maybe they've seen so many chatterbaits that a Swimjig now is so subtle, they'll commit to that. And a lot of times in the dog days of summer, you have flat calm days and flat calm conditions in the middle of the mornings, where subtle is better, because you don't have, like, those fish can see so well, the water's starting to clean up, so taking that chatterbait down, if that's not the case, picking up a Swimjig can be a player in generating a few more bites. I got this one on braid because I was swimming in around heavier cover. If I'm out there in the grass, like in a grass scenario, like a Potomac River, a Gunnersville, a Rayburn, you know, thinking of some of the lakes that I really think have a lot of grass in them, I'll throw braid if I feel like it's heavier, you know, grass, but I'll also throw, like if it's like eelgrass itself, I might just throw a 14-pound Suffix advanced fluorocarbon. It gives me time to let that fish grab it, and then they're not letting it go a lot of times. I mean, I'm not saying they won't ever, but 9 out of 10 bass, once he commits to the bait, it's gonna hold on to it for a while. So taking your time, setting the hook and getting a good hook, a hook set is really important, and just getting those fish in the boat. As far as actions go, I cast it out there, I reel it in, I stop it, I pop it around, I'm snapping it out of that grass, reel, snap, reel. Like that's sort of like what I'm trying to impart, a little bit of action. Not necessarily the same action of what you guys see me out there, like, or a lot of people call it the Alabama shake, where you're just like shaking that rod tip and like reeling. It's not the same as that. It's more letting that bait get down there in the grass, popping it around, making sure you're keeping in contact with that, because a lot of times when you'll pop it out of that grass, that's when you'll get your bite, you know what I'm saying? So that's another way to generate some bites. For some of my friends out there, I mean, big worms in general are a big deal in this time of year. I don't know what it is, that streamline scenario, something that I've played with in the past, especially even for my night fishermen out there, bigger profile worm. This one's a giant bull worm. I've caught a few big ones on it, but if you're trying to catch the biggest bass in your lake, night fishing in this time of year is probably one of the best ways in doing so. Big giant worms. I'm Nico rigging this one. This is a, I think this is like a plum apple bullworm. And I have a number 8 crossover ring on that guy. And then I'm also using a 3/32 Nico weight in it. So not crazy heavy, but something that I can cast around. Maybe it's on the grass flat. Maybe it just casts it around docks itself. Maybe it's on gravel banks. The bass typically will come up and feed in the evenings and late at night. So if you're a big night fisherman, trying to Nico rig bigger profile worms can be a way to generate bites. And this is a good way to catch fish during the day. Not gonna get a ton of bites doing this, but I do believe that it's a great way to generate some bites. Now you can Texas rig a 10-inch worm, still a great way to catch a lot of fish. And I'll even pitch and flip a 10-inch worm in the month of July, like Texas rigging it. But this is a new way that I feel like not all the fish have seen this. and just being a bigger profile. You either go one of two ways in July. You either go really big or you go downsize, right? So to me, this is already going the opposite way. Even if I'm not fishing at night, rigging something up like this guy, a bigger profile worm, just has a drawing power, and it can just generate some bites that I feel like, you know, a smaller worm might not. It just, either way, and you just gotta play with it on your own specific lake. So like on falls, like where I would sort of assume to even play with this in general. Say I'm even in the river sections, or going back down the lake more to like the actual narrow area and down in this zone. Like maybe it's just like, you know, channel swings, little pushes out there from the bank, 6 to 8 feet of water, working that worm out there on some of that stuff. Some of the same areas that I feel like the fish would be setting up on that are sort of transitioning, some flatter points where they've broken up and just sort of sitting on those flatter points in like 4 to 8 feet of water, dragging around all those places is a great way, especially at night or early in the morning. Those fish that have been feeding, they're starting to slide back out. That's the kind of stuff that I'm looking at for this guy, Nico rig. Now, if I'm Texas rigging it, fishing brush piles and isolated cover stumps, that kind of stuff. I mean, Nico rig, you can get away with it at times, but you are gonna act, you're messing around in the overall scenario. If you end up, you know, throwing an open hook, like this is it's a 1/0 VMC Nico hook, and so red line. And so for me, like this is a deal that I'm not gonna throw it a lot in like heavier cover scenarios. You're just asking to get hung up. It's really good in grass or stubbly grass. The grass is just starting to get up. Even here on, you know, Chickamauga, works well at night. Definitely a bait that I feel like you can throw. 14-pound fluorocarbon, Suffix advanced fluorocarbon is what I use. Like a 7.0 medium heavy. You don't have to go crazy heavy with this. It just sort of, you can go 7.2 medium heavy. I don't like a real heavy rod, like a 7.3 heavy with this, because I'm still trying to shake that worm and impart it. But because it's such a big profile, you can just do something a little bit different. You pitch it around. I mean, you can literally pitch this thing around on docks and everything. So just something to play around with. For my friends, I always try to bring you something a little bit different from every top baits of the month. And so big worms, Nico rigged is something unique and different. And just figuring, adding that to the rotation would be a good idea. One thing that I really want to hit on as well in the month of July that transpires is there's typically a pretty big bluegill spawn that happens. Still, the major bluegill spawn is probably the month of May, but now that the bass are breaking up and schools are breaking up out offshore, the month of July is still one of the best months to go and find fish. I mean, the first time I remember actually figuring out like an understanding what the bluegill spawn and what the fish did was on Lake Washita. Lake Washita back in the day in Arkansas, I was going down there for a Forestwood Cup to pre-practice, and I went down there and started going these pockets, and you see these bluegill spawning up there in these wolf packs of 20, 30, 40 bass that are literally wolf packing. And a lot of times those fish were schooling fish that would shift up shallower. Like they'd blow up on shad in the morning and they would shift up shallower even in the afternoon and focus on those bluegill and really like wolf pack around bluegill beds, because what happens is they'll push the bluegill and then one bluegill would get off by himself and then it was over for him. Sorry, buddy. Like it was not a good scenario if you were a bluegill and there's 40 bass rolling up on a bluegill bed, right? Especially if you're one of those guys about 6 or 8 inches long, 6 inches long, a bluegill, you're just, tough scenario. So that being said, it's a great way to catch big ones. And sometimes we don't fish bodies of water that the water's clean enough to see that. So like, I mean, I'm thinking of course like a Dale Hollow, that would be a great scenario. Highland reservoirs, this patterns really can be a great way to generate, but don't sleep on it on waters. It's a little bit stained just because what happens is, well, hello. Got a little visitor in here. Hey, Mr. Bird. I hear ya. So, don't sleep on this just making like a Highland reservoir deal. Yo, I get it. Come back later, son. All right, back to it. Bluegill spawn. The areas I'm gonna show you guys some of the stuff that I'm gonna look at for if the bluegill are spawning. They're typically still going to go into areas like, say in this pocket right here, or say you're gonna slide inside of this creek arm. It's like an idle zone. In these little turns, same sort of stuff, they'll spawn in May. Some of these fish will pull, those bluegill spawn in the backs of the ends of pockets, turns, corners, gravel pushes, stuff like that. And that's where those bass will get in those pockets again in wolf pack. And that's when I'm like, of course, picking up that swim jig or picking up like a buzz bait or a plopping style bait can be a great way to generate some bites in that scenario. You mean, I think back in the Force Wood Cup days, prop baits were big, walking baits, topwater baits obviously work, wacky worms going to be a major player as well, just like throwing a pig stick, if you're targeting that type of fish, right? But that to me is just something that will continue to play, and it's a technique and a way of targeting a group of bass that is just doing something different on your body of water. There's a lot of things that are transpiring in the month of July, and that's just one of the many things that the fish will be doing. The bluegill spawn is definitely one I would recommend. I'm gonna hit on one thing, shout out, well, first off, let's talk about big baits, because I think that sometimes this time of year, since the bluegill spawn's happening, another thing that's good is a glide bait. This one right here, shout out to the guy, everybody at York Glides. This one actually caught some bass on it at Heavy Hitters. So got this guy right here. He looks like a shad, also sort of bluegilly. Great bait to throw this time of year shallow. In a lot of those scenarios, like in them little corners in the pockets, turns, places like that, this bait chops really well and actually just has a really good action. I think the other thing when you're picking a glide bait, I like a narrower glide bait just because like your length of your glide is important for drawing power as well. But I feel like the thinner glides, like they're just not as big and bulky. And I think that they just commit to them a little bit better. Just a little bit thinner profile from traditional glides. Of course, I still have an Arashi tied on. So for like, that's to me is the best over the counter day in and day out glide bait that I throw all the time. Like a glide, as far as an Arashi goes, you could chop him around, glide him. He's not really a chopping glide, he's more of like a farther gliding glide, where this guy's choppy, but still has a good gliding action too. He's a little bit of both. Difference is, obviously this is like just under $200, where an Arashi might be like 40 bucks. So just different scenarios. If you get lucky enough to grab one of these, it's pretty good. You know, think it's a good glide. I mean, there's a lot of great glides out there in the market, but I am starting to get on a kick with this one for sure. As far as what I'm gonna be throwing this, it's gonna be, actually at Heavy Hitters, I'll tell you real quick here a story. I was catching them on this glide and I was reeling it really fast in those heron lakes, and they were coming blowing that sucker out of the water. It was crazy. So that's what I was throwing. It's a bait that like you can reel real fast on like a heron scenario, but you also can glide and chop around, like lay down trees, getting in pockets. If there's wolf packs up there shallow, you can generate bites like that. Even up the rivers and the water gets a little bit cleaner and you don't have a lot of rain. Say flipping's not the best scenario, I'll pick that up and glide around some of those bigger lay down trees or log jams, and you draw some of the biggest fish out. They're at least gonna look at him. They're gonna at least come out and say, not today. Or you might get the biggest bite of the day on that glide. So definitely recommend that guy, because he's just sort of a good shallow water way to generate bites. Okay, last but not least, we're gonna talk about two things. Spinner rods. You can't go wrong with a spinner rod in the month of July. Right here on my right-hand side, I have a drop shot with a plum janitor. I throw that size 2/0 VMC Finesse Nico hook on this guy. I think brush piles and stumps is a way to generate some bites this time of year. Those fish are breaking up again offshore. So some of those offshore bass are getting in that 6 to 10 feet of water, and they're getting on stumps, they're getting on brush. A drop shot is a great way to generate bites on those fish that obviously are already pressured, right? They're already feeling the pressure, or say they've just been living their summer on that stump or brush, right? Dragging that around and fishing that kind of stuff, a drop shot's good. I typically go with a 1/4 ounce VMC tungsten weight. This one was actually from Potomac, and I ended up going to a 3/16. So if I'm fishing it shallower, I'll go to a 3/16. Nothing too crazy. This is like the new VMC drop shot weight that you can actually tie on, which I like that option better, just because you get, like when you have a tungsten weight on the drop shot, the worst thing ever is like those pinching weights that they you used to have. Just slinging them things off and knowing there goes $1.50 or $2 something, like just casting. That's the most frustrating thing. So actually tying your weight on like that just helps you not go through nearly as many weights. And so spending a little extra money and getting the newer one. This is also matte black. Not saying it matters a ton, but it just, for me, again, it's another thing that's not shiny. It's not a shad. Casting it out there, fish doesn't go to commit to that, hits the bottom, sees this worm, boom, hopefully bites this. That's my hope anyway. That is my hope, and that's sort of what it is. Now, as far as rods that I really pick a drop shot, especially in this scenario. So you can tell I'm Texas rigging this drop shot with that 2/0 hook. A big thing with a janitor though is making sure you have enough bite in your hook. So see how I have enough bite in that 2/0 hook right there? That's a 2/0 VMC. So if I go to Texas rig this, I don't like, I'll give you a for instance, like I'm not a big fan of Texposing with like a rebarb and some of those other hooks, like because they don't have as big a gap. At least on this worm, right? So when you see me throwing this, I'm not throwing like an owner or like a cover shot or a rebarb. Those type of hooks have very minimal amounts of bite on them. So they're good for like thinner worms and stuff like that. But for this worm, I really want to make sure I have enough bite when that fish bite, it ultimately commits to the bait. I need to have enough bite in my hook to where I can set the hook, get that fish in the boat. You know what I'm saying? So that's definitely an important part of making it happen and actually getting that, getting those fish bite, boom, hooked up, got them, ready to roll. So that's definitely it. 7-1 medium is what I'm using right here. I do like a little bit more backbone in my rod because I'm Texas rigging this, is like Texposing it, rigging it weedless more so, because when you set the hook, you need to drive that hook home still, right? If you have a lighter rod, a lot of times, like if you're nose hooking this bait, that's fine, it works well just like that, but you don't need as heavy of a rod. But when you're doing it like I am right there, you're just more weedless, you can fish around more places, around more brush, stuff like that, and that's when grass, etc., whatever, and that's when I typically will go with a little bit heavier action rod. That 7-1 medium in the Select series does a good job of that. 10-pound Suffix Finesse fluorocarbon, 8-pound revolve braid. That's what I've been throwing all year. It's that yellow green, it's actually green braid that I've been using all year. It's been really good. I've been a huge fan of Nano back in the day. Nano does have more wind knots to it. It's not as supple, I would say, as Nano braid that I used on Suffix for years. Just I've gotten used to it and I like it. It does well, it's consistent, and that guy gets it done. So no issue there. Last but not least, you can't go wrong with him, and you gotta have him in your box, is a freeloader. And this is for a lot of other stuff, like fishing out at offshore schools, the fish are still pressured, throwing a freeloader out there, and or fishing brush and stumps can be a great way to generating some bites. Just really brush piles in general on some of those places. Like if I'm looking out here on Falls Lake, I'm looking for some of these flatter areas to look for brush on some of these flat, let me see how deep this is. So like 8 to 12 feet of water would be my #1 choice for finding brush this time of year. Cause like again, fish are out there offshore, they break up, they were in maybe like 14 to 20. Now all of a sudden they move up in that 8 to 12 is really a good depth zone. Throwing this bait on some of those places along with that drop shot generates some really good bites and can be a way in just getting a few more fish that want more shad-based stuff. So drop shot, freeloader, just for me when I'm fishing out there offshore or I'm fishing isolated cover like brush piles and stuff like that, to me is just a good way, and covering it, utilizing forward focusing sonar does help that, just because you're more efficient in seeing the cover and being able to make a good accurate cast. But it's not you don't always have to have that. So just don't get discouraged if you don't have forward facing sonar. It doesn't mean you can't throw those techniques and can't fish offshore. It just does make it a little bit more difficult to understand. That being said, the month of July, there's so many more things that I could have talked about, but I wanted to give you guys a good overall breakdown. Shout out to all my friends and fans out up north. This is the time of year that I'm flipping milfoil. I'm also fishing out on grass edges, and this is gonna be like more of my offshore. July is probably the month that a lot of my fish from Minnesota, New York, a lot of these places, they start to get out offshore grass, offshore edges, cranking, chatterbaiting. These are the times I'm gonna be looking for the big groups in the grass, trying to find the key fish. Like that's typically what happens up north this time of year, and that's what I'm gonna be targeting if I'm looking for the largemouth. If I'm looking for the smallmouth, my smallmouth guys. You can't go wrong. I mean, of course, a drop shot, a Ned rig, all that stuff is great, but another bait that I'm gonna throw in there is a mooch minnow. For a lot of my friends up there in the northern parts of the country, that mooch minnow is absolutely killer. I might even throw like a sun gill color if I'm trying to imitate a perch for some of that stuff, like shaking that around. A lot of times that's a great way to generate some bites. A freeloader is still really good out there on the edges of the grass, and some of the places those fish will group up, hard bottom places, corners, nooks, crannies, on those points can be a great way. Because basically what happens in June for us is happening in July for you all. So we're just a month behind, but wanted to shout out to you all. But do me a favor, Drop in a comment below. Let me know what lake you guys want next. Hopefully these videos are helping you all. 4th of July is almost here, so happy 4th of July. Shooting some fireworks off, celebrating America, baby. We're gonna have some fun times. Hot dog days in summer, man, they ain't gonna keep us down. We're gonna go out there and reel some bass and have a great time. We will see you on the next one.